Hi everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to introduce to you all Patrik Hübner. Patrik has come all the way from Germany to talk to us today. He is an interdisciplinary designer who explores the realm of generative design, creative coding, and blends together the mindset of a creative director with the capabilities of a creative technologist. He ideates, designs, and develops beautiful, dynamic, and reactive brand experiences across a multitude of touchpoints while telling data-driven stories. His work has been recognized with numerous international and German design awards, including 2 D&AD pencils, an ADC, and a Red Dot Design Award. He currently hones and spreads his craft through teaching and freelancing. Patrik, you have the stage.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. I'm still on German time, so I hope I get this all right. So yeah, I want to talk to you about kind of my work as a generative designer, and basically I specialize in branding and communications design. And does this thing work? Yeah, does it do it? So why am I here? I have multiple talks, but I thought for you guys, maybe it's something where I wanted to take a little bit of a step back and actually discuss like in current times of machine learning, artificial intelligence, what actually our role as creatives and as creative professionals is. Because I feel like sometimes the technological advances are put so much center stage that sometimes it actually gets lost why should we use those things or what our job really is about. And I have this work, let me go over here, thesis, and that's basically that I kind of strongly believe or subscribe to the idea that in order to be successful as creatives in the long run, we actually have to adapt to these technologies and kind of basically anticipate how we can use them, right? And I mean, that's like a pretty broad statement. So in the end, there's a lot of people currently like sharing knowledge or saying like they know so much about these technologies. I feel like usually it's really important to point out that these are individual perspectives, and what I can share is mine and how I ended up doing what I do and how I got there. And I thought I'd frame it a little bit from that perspective because hopefully it makes it a bit more approachable and tangible how you can actually use some of these approaches and strategies right now in your actual life. So that would be the idea of hopefully what I can share with you today. And also just on a side note, there's going to be a semi-lecture / workshop on Wednesday at 12 p.m. where we actually can dive in a little bit deeper because I don't want to overload this talk. And we also can like explore a little bit some of the core ideas, and we can just share and talk about that. Okay, here we go. Sorry, let me use the buttons here. It's weird. Okay, so basically, I don't want to tell you my whole life story, but just how I got started. Basically, when I was really young, I always wanted a computer, and I had to wrestle my dad for super long because I was so excited to get one. And basically what happened is that I had to forego 4 years of birthday and Christmas presents, but then he actually got me one. And I don't know why exactly, but this kind of piece of glass and plastic, to me that was always like an incredibly intriguing thing, right? The promise of if I was only smart enough, if I only put in enough time, when with my young brain I thought I could really do it all. And I was really drawn to the ideas of computer as something that you don't just consume, but that actually enables you to express your own ideas. I got into programming at a pretty early age. You can imagine I was a nerd, didn't have that much friends, but I really spent a long time with that machine, just, I don't know, first playing and then, getting more and more acquainted to really coding and being able to use it. But at the same time, luckily that isn't the only thing I did, otherwise I would probably not be standing here, but I really also got very much into all the beautiful cultural things this world has to offer. I play a couple of instruments, I started drawing and painting and taking photography, basically just, trying all the different outlets that you have. And I think these two things were quite formative because usually either, you tend to be like someone who's more drawn to computers or more drawn to design, but very rarely does it actually cross over. And for me, that was really a great combination because my left brain was able to analyze certain things and express them in code, but then at the same time, was really drawn to all the creative things and trying to broaden my horizon and always focusing on people and these just wonderful facets. And what that really did was kind of make me, at an early age, already question the status quo, right? Because in the end, I didn't just take technology as something that was given to me, or music that is something that you consume, but it was also always something that I could really shape and be part of. And I was growing up in the 90s, basically, where the internet was just picking up more pace, and it was a different time, obviously, where people were just creating all these weird experiments and just trying to be a part of it. And it was really interesting because in the end, at that time, the question of who actually gatekeepers to knowledge were challenged, and basically, everything was becoming more accessible. And also for me, being young at that age, but being in that specific time where there weren't so many people doing these kind of things, even at 14 or 15 of age, I actually started my first small company, and people would take that seriously, because in the end, for me, that was also always the question of what can a single person achieve. And at that time, the answer was quite a lot. I mean, a lot of the early programs and things you actually saw were just one or two people doing that. And in the end, it was also, increasingly something where you could see that, our work was becoming more mechanized and automated. And, that's just kind of the world I grew up with. Continue here. But at some point, I actually had to make some money because, basically just thinking about that stuff also doesn't get you anywhere. So I started studying, but very quickly co-founded a super small design studio. We were working at the intersection between branding, design, and electronic commerce, which at that time was still a niche field. And over time, it grew to almost 50 people and was quite a successful endeavor, which was really interesting. And we worked for all kinds of national and international brands. But I increasingly got bored of that because it felt also that we were kind of repeating ourselves. So I was more and more interested in actually pushing those things, integrating automation, basically doing certain tests where computers will automatically select certain layouts or designs to optimize all of these things. And that was happening at a time where also agencies were getting more and more basically foreign or international people competing in the same space. So that was really something that I was very concerned with. How do you always try to be on top? How can you never be just outdated because you do the same thing over and over again? And fast forward to today, I am quite lucky to be teaching at multiple universities, and I picked that path specifically also because I'm really interested in seeing what people are interested in today, but also what young design students see as challenges, and what kind of problems they see and how they face them. Because I feel there's a lot of similarities to those things I've seen, and kind of trying to start this conversation really about how we can collectively move some of these ideas and fields forward. And I think there's just two things which seem to be the general consensus on what the design world is kind of facing as challenges right now. Really oversimplified, obviously, but there's this idea of competition, right? What I was mentioning, the global competition. Everybody with a computer and knowledge can now kind of compete on that market. Everybody can try or actively be a designer. But it's also a competition to a degree with a machine, right? A lot of the fears people have currently with, I would consider also the overhyping of artificial intelligence and machine learning systems kind of lead to that same thing. Where do we actually stand as designers? What's our role? Are we going to be outdated in a couple of years as some of the farms decide? And the other thing which kind of goes hand in hand with that is this change, constant change, right? You could actually argue that nowadays disruption to a degree is the prevailing business model. Everything gets faster and faster, and it's just this continuous change that's never stopping, where people really have a problem, I think, just continuously being part of that, because it's obviously demanding, but also as you work on projects, you can't always push it. So I feel this is something that is really tangible, it's really real. And I'm an optimist, so I always take these challenges as something very positive. I try to work them into my work and and I kind of say that the field of work and activity of designers and creative professionals is expanding, and that's a wonderful thing because I'd say that we're at a point in time where probably the spaces that we could actually design and make sense of have never been bigger, and that's something that for me is always something that I get very excited about. So be the metaverse, VR, the crazy internet that you surf, the social media, all these technologies coming, augmented reality. In a sense, these are all spaces that we get to design, that we get to make sense of, and that we also need to bring to people, that we need to make accessible, right? So it is really about how we make these spaces tangible and how we see those as certain opportunities and spheres that we can influence. And I think it's also our mission to make these tangible and understandable. So it's not necessarily about the final end result that you see, but also the process of how you get people there, how you get them into these spaces. So for me, that's a huge chance because I would say that design really makes this change tangible, right? It can be something that we get to frame, that we actually can tell a story about, that we can turn into something where we reach people and kind of try to push them forward or tell them our narratives, sell them something, whatever it is you want to do. Okay, here we go. And when you look back in time, really, technological and societal changes, I would say, are always reflected in the designs and product designs of that time. And I just selected, multiple random things here, but what I hope that you feel and see is that all of these, they trigger a certain memory in your head, or a certain feel of nostalgia, or just emotions. And that's just something that I feel sometimes gets lost a bit, especially in this whole discussion about technologies, that it's not really about these specific end results, but it's about what we get into people's head and how we kind of make these otherwise, just technological things or just physical things into something that have a story, that have something that connect to you, that remain in your brain, and that you actually feel something. And there's this other thing that I very much subscribe to, and that is that it's a quote from a book, or it's a German one, but it means Designing Futures, by Benedict Groß and Eileen Mandir, both wonderful professors from Germany. And they say that designers take on a new role as mediators between research, politics, and society. And I think that's also very interesting to me because while I am a brand designer and primarily working in communications design, I still feel that we must not forget, the impact and also the power that our work really has, and how in a more and more fragmented world, right, where everything is just tailored so much towards ourselves, and where algorithms just create something specifically for me and for you and for you. That we mustn't forget that it's actually also something interesting or something important to me. Sorry, oh, in my throat. Can't stand the air conditioning. All right. So what that means for me is actually that as designers, we really have the ability to shape the world. And that's kind of the mission statement. It's a broad one, right? It's a big one, but it's something I really just, again, with all of this talk about machine learning, are we going to get just going to be run over by all these machines. I think this is the one thing that we kind of can focus on, and that is kind of the superpower of design. And why it doesn't always necessarily translate so much in the real world, in like agency and design world, that it's so hard to actually comprehend what that means, what we can actually do, right? So indeed, like what it says here, the increasingly rapid developments kind of are just facing or making us face ever new challenges. And I think specifically these technical developments are something where more people from our field sometimes feel they can't actually keep up. And so that leads to everyone using the same kind of tool, using the same kind of mindset, using the same kind of resources. And that's kind of sad because in the end, I mean, design is about innovating and pushing things forward. And Tara gave me like a tour of the campus, and I was just really so happy to see how diverse your education is, because in Germany, sometimes people get pushed very much more straight into certain jobs as designers, UX, UI, communications So I don't know if I'm telling you this for the 5,000th time or not, but seeing how broad you can actually work and explore is really actually a superpower, and it's amazing to see. So I think you might not be so much prone to the dangers of this over-qualification just into one specific realm, into one specific direction. So that's really awesome. So in the end, like, there's a simple question: how can we keep up? What can we do? And for me, the answer is these two words: computational thinking, which I'm going to get to more specific examples, by the way, so don't worry. But it's a pretty broad word that has been coined by James Bridle in his book New Dark Age, and it's actually something that he doesn't necessarily see as something good, because he says that people in computational thinking tend to think more in systems, and if they do that, like, everything kind of becomes more robotic. But I would actually flip that argument on your head and say, if you think in systems, that makes the world accessible from new perspectives and actually gives you a new world and a view on certain things, and is actually something which hasn't traditionally been done in the field of design and graphics design. So I would say and argue that in this whole world of, like, machine learning, AI, automation, generative design, it's not so much a matter of changing one's actions, so the physical things that you do on prompting, or like the latest LLM, always keeping up on that, but more really of how you can change your way of thinking and how you can actually create with these assets, how you can make them work for you. And there's this argument, again, that I have no actual scholarly basis on, but I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory, that AI and machine learning will eventually always be faster than us if they're trained on specific things. So it cannot be the goal of us to outrun those or to be better than those, but really to be more in a position where we can understand how we can, like, anticipate what will come of these systems. So basically being able to also understand them and push them forward, and also be interested in how we can actually collaborate with those systems in different ways. So the idea of co-creation is something I'm going to bring up in a second. So in the end, it's really about changing your thinking, not your action so much. That kind of automatically results from that. And I have three aspects I want to share with you, and those are, go. And it sounds complicated at first, but I promise if you really think about it, it's totally not. But the first one is about thinking in systems, a systemic way of kind of approaching the world. And what I mean by that is that we can actually capture, recognize, and anticipate the relationships that we have to our environment, and kind of the patterns that kind of come from it, and try to translate them into rules. So basically, be that the weather, or how birds fly, or the stock market, or whatever you look at, right? Everything in our world can be understood as a system. And again, that's where, like, small Patrik came in, like, with programming and stuff. It's always been the way of how I kind of thought. I was always forced to kind of explain these systems to computers, because in the end, that's what programming kind of is, right? An algorithm is just a set of rules, of instructions, and kind of being able to understand certain things in our environment as a system, and then kind of being able to express them in a very concise way. It means you can both share them with your fellow colleagues or students or designers, but also with a machine. So that's kind of really just something that is very ingrained into my way of working. And what it enables you to do is kind of to think and to work programmatically. So in the end, if you have those rules, if you find them in the environment, in the world, you can actually make them work for you. You can utilize them in your projects. And in the end, what that also means, and that's really interesting for me, is that it kind of separates the creative act in a way from being the person who creates the final end results, but become more like a conductor, somebody who actually enables certain programs to create something for you. And there's this quote by a Swiss graphic designer, Kai Gerstner, who wrote a book called Design Programs, or Programs Design. Instead of solutions for programs, programs for solutions. That's a very condensed sentence, but for me that means instead of coming up with that individual, one unique solution and then calling it a day, what you actually can do is create this space where, like, a multitude of solutions, depending on certain variables and ideas, can actually exist. And that can work for graphics design, product design, whatever you work in. But I think it's more uncommon to see in communications and graphics design because people don't necessarily tend to think that way. It's more common in, for example, something like architecture or product design, where generative design is already a bit more common. And if you combine these things, what it actually ends up being is a generative approach. So combining like these multifaceted systems and programs with the goal of making something specifically new and comprehensible and making it or staging it from a fresh new perspective, that's kind of like what happens if you combine these two things. And for me, that's also the distinction between like generative design and something like creative coding, where generative design usually tends to work towards a specific goal and wants to solve something, while creative coding, in the definition I subscribe to most, is more an iterative and somewhat playful process of kind of understanding like the creative potential of code and how that in like this endless cycle can actually push you forward. So it's a meditation on code as a creative medium where anything, even mistakes, are welcome. And that's also like the really cool thing, by the way, in creative coding and programming, right? If you make a mistake, it can still look beautiful. And so that's like one specific aspect of that you don't necessarily have in other fields of programming. But again, that's why I say I'm a generative designer, not a creative coder, right? So my goal still is to make projects that solve a specific, communicative challenge or that actually solve design problems. All right, so that was a lot of big words, and it's going to get easier from here. So just an interlude with some photos of me as a kid. I'm showing those because music has always been a part of my life, and it's really been something that was very important to me, and it's something that actually, changed my life while I was working at an agency and was growing, and I was becoming less of a designer and more of a manager and creative director. And as I was growing more and more frustrated with that situation, and also got more and more bored with what I was doing because it felt like the projects were getting bigger, but they were not getting more challenging. Some good friends of mine who are really talented jazz musicians asked me if I wouldn't want to join them and kind of like create visuals for their music. And because they had recently seen like a really cool show where there was like some installations of art students, and they were like kind of making this whole composition where music and visuals were coming together. And that was like how I discovered actually creative coding in the first place, right? They said, do you know about generative design and creative coding? They gave me a book, it's actually by also Benedict Groth, that we just mentioned, and some other authors. And for me, that was like a huge outlet because I knew how to code, and I love music, so sadly they're much better musicians than I am. They didn't actually ask me if I wanted to join on stage for the music, but just for the visuals. But at the end, actually, I got my own booth and programmed some stuff so that I could look cool. But it was really interesting and a transformative time because in the end, I was really finding like a new lease on my creative love and of discovering stuff and pushing that forward. And kind of like whenever I came home from my job, I would, eat and then sit in front of the computer again, and then until like 3 p.m. in the night, 4 p.m., do that stuff, and then repeat that for 2 years. I mentioned in class I was doing this like daily coding challenge for a while, right? And that's kind of what got me started. So basically I was iterating on how to create those visuals. And it was really an interesting journey also because you say, okay, let's visualize music, but as you get into it more and more, you discover that music is all of these things. It's sound over time. It's also, you could argue that you compose time, but it's also the spectrum, the volume. So the further you go into any direction, the more it opens up. And that's kind of what I mean by that, right? So if I like get these 3 words I mentioned like back again, right? The systemic approach in this case is, what is music, right? Everything I just said, sound over time, frequency, spectrum, is it emotion, is it me thumping my foot? Everything, all of that is music, right? And I can tap into all of it, is it my heartbeat, etc. And what I did is I kind of started picking certain aspects from that and turned that into little programs. What if just the volume did something? What if just the crowd? What if, people breathing because the heart rate elevates, etc. Everything you can tap into. And I turned all of those into little experiments, and I could always test them on stage and, also bring it to a real life location. We were actually gigging and, doing all kinds of cool locations. The closest I ever got to doing music for a living. And if you combine all of that in the middle, right, form for music, like if you tap into those systems, turn it into a program, and then that becomes a generative system. It's independent also of me, right? I'm not really creating the visuals, I'm just creating the space where it can happen. And the individual unique form is generated in that moment, and in these systems it's also never repeatable. So that was really fascinating. We did that for a year, and I started getting more interested to go beyond music, and I started like tapping into other things. And I did a lot of design experiments that respond to the world in general. So I first started just integrating people and interfaces. Like what would happen if I wasn't the one making the decisions, but if other people could do that? What if I actually visualized the underlying formulas of some of the systematic things I saw? What would come from that? What if I started integrating physics into that? So like more complex systems that actually drive systems. What if I combined those with, for example, typography and made a physical system actually drive the typographic system or integrated things from the world? What would happen if I had one starting point, but each iteration could go into a totally different direction? And I'm always interested in how I can integrate people into these systems. I was much skinnier back then. Again, it couldn't do me very well, but also what are the limits, right? What should you possibly not do? Is there a limit at the human face? You know, what happens then? And really motion, both on the outside of us and we ourselves as interfaces, but also the inside, like what is happening inside of the body and how can I tap into that? And how can you make it tangible? How can you create interfaces that actually get people drawn into it? How can you go beyond the screen? Where is that even possible? And is there a limit to, you know, how far you can push those things? So all of these things were just experiments I was really doing while still doing my, obviously then, less exciting job, you know, doing like branding and electronic commerce, basically repeating the same thing over and over again. And I tried to push that, or explain that to my business partner, and kind of, you know, said, look, man, I've got this like new pair of glasses on me, I'm seeing the world totally differently, this is like the future, we gotta do it. But I didn't have the real words for it at the time, because while I was feeling it, I couldn't actually express why I felt it was so special. And yeah, I mean, he was like more of a computer science guy, so he said like, yeah, but let's make more money actually with like these, like the established stuff. And that was the point in time where I said, I'm a bad businessman, by the way. I wasn't really involved in the company as much as you would think, so I just said, okay, you know, I just take the little money I have, and I'll just take that leap of faith, and I'll go solo. I believe in it. I believe in this, and I would always regret if I wouldn't try it, right? I mean, this is something that I just feel is going to push me forward. And so in the end, really, I started trying to figure out how these experiments could turn into something that can actually make usable in the context of communications design and branding and my world of storytelling. So there's actually a range of, you know, things that, you know, generative design can be used for. It can be the center of storytelling, or it can just be a tool that enables certain processes. And now we'll get to the stuff where you can actually look at some of the things. I actually brought 3 different just cases to give you like an idea and a range for everybody who's interested in coming into the workshop. And that event actually have a bit more specific information about how that process actually works, what the underlying formula of that is, and how you can apply that for yourself. So that's what's for the other day. So to cut this short, I won't bore you for too long here. So in the end, before I show you those cases, sorry, I added that. I would say that in communication design, our task is to like achieve these clearly defined goals within the framework of storytelling and aesthetics, right? It be that if you want to reach people emotionally, get them to have a new perspective, whatever. And I'm coming from a space where you could argue that there's a certain problem, because today there's an abundance of designers and almost all of them use the same core strategies and tools, right? Be that Photoshop, Cinema 4D, or some of the, ChatGPT or other generative frameworks. In the end, people tend to be limited to that. And I would argue that generative design actually allows to offer a certain solution for that. And there's 4 things where I feel like it really shines. Because in the first thing, it's really about having a new mindset and a strategic approach that allows us to have a fresh outlook on creative challenges. It's interesting because it operates at the intersection of data, storytelling, programming, interaction, and form. That's a lot of words, and also disciplines that all have existed independently of each other for quite a while, but only now is there a point in time where computers, the internet, data, automation, etc., all of these things actually converge to make it possible as this new field. And I believe a really strong aspect is that you can actually create new forms of expression with that, right? So by using data to influence and automate our design systems, but kind of never forgetting that we tell stories with it, we actually can do things that have not been done before in this way. And a lot of my work really involves projects that tread new grounds, and where you can actually look on Pinterest on how other people have solved it, because there's actually not a lot of references. And what I say, right, communication can be reimagined and restaged. So basically, when you do all of that, what it kind of leads to is finding aspects or perspectives on storytelling and branding, where you can push people to or nudge them into a new direction, where hopefully the outcome usually is that they say, I haven't thought about it this way, and then there's this first point of entry where you can get them intrigued and get an emotional response from them. So in the end, it's between technology and storytelling. It's neither individually, but it's really, if you combine those, where I feel it shines and where also it becomes interesting. And again, saying all of these things as like a counterpoint to all the promises from all the tech companies and engineers who say, just wait a couple of years and basically like machine learning is going to automate all of your jobs. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case, because the storytelling aspect is not one that you easily extract from these systems. So yeah, staging those stories in a different way, and actually working in a way that was inconceivable without this approach. Right, and yeah, a lot of slides here. But I believe if you want to remain competitive, really understanding this core concept of a generative program, which are two distinct words which actually open up entire worlds, are really, really important, because that is going to be something that's going to help you to distinguish yourself from all the other people who are basically using the tried and true classic, more static formulas for design. All right, so now we get to the cases. And I brought three. So the first one is really how can we use generative design in communication and design? And I brought a short teaser trailer. It's going to be audio, so I don't know if it's going to be super loud, if I just play it. Let's test it. Okay, don't be afraid. There's no audio at all. It's from 2017, so it's now 7 years old. Is that possible? Okay. I still love it because it's a very simple case, but I think it shows what my goal for generative design and my perspective on it is, right? So the backstory of this is, I don't know, well, you know Germany, probably not, but it's a wine grown in Hamburg, which is like an area in the very north of Germany, so it's cold and, you know, as it said in the case, like not something where you would typically expect wine to be grown, right? It's like California, it's Australia. So the problem of these guys, it's a very small bespoke vineyard, was like, how are we going to be taken seriously? Like they're going to put us like in all these trade shows, they're going to put us in the back of the booth because, you know, nobody's going to want to taste our wine. And so we thought about, okay, what is wine, right? How can we solve that problem? And if you think about it, wine is kind of like the direct result of the grapes which have been used in the product, and those are obviously influenced by the weather and the individual, you know, kind of elements they're exposed to in that year that they're growing. So we kind of actually went all in on that idea of actually focusing a brand crafted by the elements and basically staging the perceived disadvantage, like the cold weather, is something that would get people curious as to what this product actually is. And you can actually see it, and there was this short also version of the actual bottle, and all these bottles, they're stored in the vineyard for the entire year, so they're exposed to the elements as well, so you can actually tangibly feel like how they got exposed during that time. And the end idea actually being to get people to think about what is wine from a new perspective, right? And that's for me something that I always try to evoke in all of my projects, and possible, I don't always succeed. Because mostly people then, if you're into wine, ask like, what does it taste like? And that's the moment where I want them actually to be, right? Where they are opening their mind and being curious again, being interested in it, and start to think about it. And so that's like a way of also like understanding again the systematic, programmatic, generative approach, right? The system is the weather and kind of the wine and the idea of what that actually is, and then the program turns that into all these expressions, and it becomes something that without our actual actions can be used for every year going forward, and where there's no human needed to kind of create individual packaging. In 2017, it was more revolutionary than it is nowadays also to have just a web-based tool that can generate seemingly infinite results for like all kinds of marketing materials and collateral, and also like the social media department, or I removed that, but as you saw, the social media department could use it and have a lot of fun with it, and basically it can be used on all kinds of levels, and it's a web-based tool, so it runs in a web browser. It's just super accessible and super easy to use. Another one which is, I feel, a little bit on the other side of the spectrum, so I made that bold claim that generative design allows us to like tell stories which would possibly have been unconceivable without this approach, and I would say in this interpretation, like brut wine is one that really relies on this generative approach, and where it's at the very core of the brand narrative and the identity of what we have actually crafted. So on the other side of the spectrum, I want to show you a project on how this has been used on the cultural sector, and I know that Tara is a fan of that, and so that's cool. It's for the Philharmony of Luxembourg. It's also just a very short case video. So as you can see, it's an identity for, I think, the only Philharmony in Luxembourg, because it's like a tiny, tiny country. This is the actual building, and as you saw, the logo itself is derived from the architecture, but then if you think about it in what this Philharmony really is, it's like this physical space converging with the individual moments in time where music is being played. So it's a simple story, but it's a very large expressive toolkit. And we applied it to the logo, but we kind of, or I built, in this case, I also building it all myself, but this like entire web-based tool where the very, very tiny design team, it's just 2 people like doing all the marketing for that location, can kind of like drag and drop like just audio files, and they can like generate all kinds of assets from that: animation, vector exports, PNG, templates for multiple tools, You can actually export it as 3D files, but that's more of like an advanced future thing. And also what it does is, for example, in this case, as we zoom in, it's actually being used for type treatment or for graphical things. So again, the actual pillars that represent are being modified by the music. We're zooming in, and then we can offset type. We can use it as backgrounds. We can actually use it to create all of these graphics. So all of that is completely automated, but there's a reason to why it looks the way it does, and that is in the end always the space and the music coming together. But again, it's not from a story perspective being pushed that much, but it's more also of a tool. So I was talking about the spectrum, right, between storytelling and tool. This one I would put more on the tool side of things, because it really just enables a very small team to output like a large body of work that otherwise in this way they could probably not have done with traditional tools. So that's something that just really helps them to push it forward. And they're doing podcasts and Instagram and social media and all the platforms. You know how much work is involved with that. And here it's basically just drag and dropping it and then exporting all of the assets and moving on to the fun stuff. And a third one that I wanted, I thought I'm a Carnegie Mellon here, so you guys are free thinkers, so that's why I'm pushing this one. It's actually a self-initiated case, but it might actually be turned into reality soon, but I'll just black them out.
How are you? An innocent question. I'm fine, you might tend to answer. But are you? Being in public, we usually cover our faces with a tentative smile. Why? Because that is what you do, isn't it? It's polite, it's kind. It's formed by advertising and media. The social face is a smiling face. It's an image, not a mirror, a surface, a mask. I'm fine. While the number of smiling faces in public remains consistent, the number of those suffering from depression is growing. During adulthood, every fourth woman and every eighth man develops depression, as do 4 to 12% of all adolescents. I'm fine. The typical image of people affected by depression is a hand hiding the face. They're no longer able to keep up their masks. Why don't we join them? Unmask yourself. This sentence invites people to drop their masks and show the reality behind the social stage. Showcased on web-enabled CLPs, in public places of pause, people are encouraged to take a selfie that reveals their actual current mood. Uploading their unmasked self, the picture appears on the CLP screen as the sum of different shapes in a three-dimensional field, symbolizing the effort that it takes to keep oneself together day by day. Simultaneously broadcast across a network of screens, people that see the image can instantly respond, show their compassion with preset emoticons, or join the brave predecessors in uploading their own unmasked selves. Surface wants to interrupt everyday life, draw people's attention to the image they create in public, and showcase the dark side of constantly hiding one's feelings. Let's show compassion to those who suffer and create connections by taking off our masks. I'm not okay. That's fine.
So that's a project for me that's more in like the research field, but I was very interested in also tackling certain challenges or topics which are not usually approached that much in like the more commercial space. And if they are, they're usually like on a very surface level. So I felt like it's not about educating people necessarily, but it's just about making it more approachable and something that you can actually experience and share. And it was also inspired during the time of pandemic, where really social interactions weren't like possible that much. And I was like seeing all of these vacant city light poster screens. I don't know, I've not seen that many here in Pittsburgh actually, but they're like basically plastered all over German cities. And I felt it was just something where like something which is usually used for selling you something that can turn into an actual interactive display that can be connected throughout cities or even between Germany and America, so there's no real limit to it. So I felt like it's something that can start an interesting conversation without being too much in your face. But as you scan it and you upload yourself, actually at the end you just get a little poem that gets you into it, and then you can actually research more if you wanted to. And it's also an example of how a lot of my projects use machine learning technologies without being actually entirely apparent, because I mean this is like also a quite dangerous thing to do, like allow people to upload selfies or things on public spaces. So there's actually a machine learning system running in the background which identifies if it's a real face or the bottom or something, and it actually filters those out. Because obviously you don't want people to push this to the extremes. But for me, again, it's just, it has been an experiment where I try to just also merge like these digital spaces with physical ones and tell a story without telling it through words immediately, right, where it actually develops. But it's, again, it's more free case, but actually there's interest, and we might actually be doing this. So, some thoughts on just how you can become active. Like obviously come to that workshop where we'll tell more specifics. For me it's really about this idea of teaming up, right? So obviously between disciplines, because you could say that teams that bring together the most diverse perspectives actually have been shown to deliver particularly diverse results. There's a lot of study on that. So it means like bringing people together from computer sciences, from design, from architecture, from product, like not really being so much isolated in individual niches, but going out there and working with others. Again, you guys are doing that much more than other universities I see. But also to ask yourself, why do we sometimes perceive the machine as a possible competitor and not try to get the machine onto our team? What would happen if we did that? And that is like what I was mentioning early on, this idea of co-creation, right? Basically trying to find spaces and ways of expressions where humans and machines can actually work together in different ways, because a machine has like a lot of advantages. It's super fast, it can work with big data, there's like systemic perspectives, high computing speeds, etc. But then there's other things that humans have, human aesthetic sensibility, value systems, etc. So these are very opposite skills. And as the definition was, the more diverse the skills, the more interesting the outcome. A lot of my projects work with this idea, like what happened if not only the human was driving or steering the system, and what not, as promised by machine learning, etc., only the machine was doing that, but what happens in the middle, right? If I hand off some of the control and can actually be surprised and inspired myself, but still have enough control that I'm leading and steering it in a very clear way, like trying to anticipate where I can take it next. So that's kind of this idea, right? Where, again, just bringing it back to this artificial intelligence idea, you could say there's only three things which are part of this whole conglomerate of things, right? Artificial intelligence systems are being kind of given form and data. So there was, like back in the day, this cool thing like a cookie or a dog, right? I mean, it's like, is it a phaser, is it a cookie? So you have form, and then you have classification data, and what it does, and that's super amazing, it spits out rules, right? It actually develops a network where it is actually autonomously able to differentiate between those things, right? So basically the rules that I was mentioning that we're trying to find in nature or in those systems, artificial intelligence can make those available to us. And on the other side, you have something which is more like akin to like classical creative coding, where it gets flipped around, right? The rules, I set the rules, right? I come up with something, as I mentioned, right? With music and how I use the spectrum, and then I feed in the data, that is, for example, the music, the weather, whatever, and it generates the form. And you can actually connect those worlds, and that's what most of my work does, right? So I use machine learning, artificial intelligence, I don't like the word so much, but basically as an input, as something that I can use as rules within my system. So I'm not that much interested in generating like the final end result with machine learning, but kind of making things accessible that weren't otherwise accessible. So basically being able to tap into a whole world of qualitative data is something funny, is something beautiful, is something good or bad. Those were things previously inaccessible to the more traditional side of programming because the algorithms that were available were not that good. All right, so just to like wrap it up to a degree, it's like, I would say that in static design, as I was showing you, and as you probably know, you start with an idea, and then human being, you design that, and then we have a specific design result. And where generative design really differs is that it also starts with an idea, but instead of like going straight to the design process, it's really about finding those rules, setting those rules, curating those rules, and then handing off the actual design process to the machine, which in the end, generates a multitude of results, and which are reactive, dynamic, interactive, and they can basically be more than just the sum of its parts. So that's for me really the key defining difference, and why I believe it is something so interesting to research, because in the end it also creates that space where I get to discover what happens and be curious and be surprised and just sometimes be blown away, sometimes be underwhelmed. It kind of depends on how projects go. And the other part is that I believe this idea of what that leads to is like waking up, right? Being in a state of mind where you continuously push yourself forward. You young people, you students, obviously you're doing that anyway, but the kind of thing that when I was telling you that story of how I got stuck in my job and where it was all so boring, right? Where I was just looking for new perspectives and new paths ahead, because I feel like that's what's driving me. I love finding new challenges and tackling them. So the question of like how these new ways of thinking can actually shape our path to the future. And there's this, I think we only have 2 more slides left, so don't worry. This is one thing I feel is really important, and that is really like how can this new mindset be something where we kind of get to control this increasingly technology-driven world. And that's this wonderful quote, I'm just going to read it. Art and culture provide forms of reflection and alternatives for action that are not available to the natural and technical sciences. Only in this way can the content potential of these technologies be exploited, right? So the idea of this short sentence is that we shouldn't just hand off like all of this control to like computer scientists and engineers, but that designers and creatives are in the unique position where they actually have the tools and the mindset to reflect upon what's happening and to understand where you take these things, and also to make an active decision of if you want to take it into that route, right? This idea of not doing everything because you can, but doing something because you can. So I think that's, for me, wrapping up and coming back to what I was saying about what I believe the mission and the goal of a designer really is. It is always making those decisions. And it's a book also by a German author, I think it's never been translated, but on basically coding as a fundamental cultural practice. And that's something really interesting to think about. So really it happens, again, between technology and storytelling. Just to reiterate that if you focus this too much, you lose what your jobs and what you are really about, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. So in the end, it's a quote by a guy from Nike. Never met him, but I saw his talk, and that kind of spoke to me. And really see what others see and find what others don't. That's kind of like really what this new outlook on things enables you to do, right? If you get a challenge and you understand this basic idea of systems, programs, and generative, it will automatically lead you to results and ideas that people who don't have access to that will just not be able to realize. And it's something that takes a bit of time, but again, it's not really complicated. It's just, understanding our environment as a source of inspiration and something that can drive things. So there's like this huge idea of input-output and how you can use that. And again, this is just shameless advertising for Wednesday, so we're going to talk about this and take a more look at that. Again, this is going to be more specific in terms of how it actually works. I wanted to give you a bit of the bigger picture and talk about that. So I'm done. Here's a QR code. I have a lot of resources on my website, actually. Obviously, I got the Instagram and whatever, but there is a pretty new section on my website called the Data Design Dictionary. Okay, we'll take out your phones. Thanks for scanning that. Yeah, there's the Data Design Dictionary where I actually take a look at a lot of the terms. And the last project we talked about, it was about how to make things and fragments accessible. That's my very small take on also what is actually the mind map on the landscape of generative design. But I also got articles on all of these things that you want to read up more on the method page. So again, I'm not trying to sell you something, but if any of this that I showed you today spoke to you, there's more resources. And also, I really love to chat about it, as you may have seen. So if you have any questions or want to get in contact, there's my email on there. So always happy to chat about that. So thanks for listening to me. I think I'm pretty much on time. And yeah, thanks.
So we're going to take questions, but really quick, the workshop is in room 107. And please be there on time because we probably will have limited seating if there's a lot of people that show up. So yeah, questions?
I know, by the way, it's a lot of input, and we need to probably process it. Yeah, you have a question also. Yeah.
I was wondering, I'm assuming that you may have used like the GL shaders for
Yeah.
is that you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like how would you advise getting into it? Like, did you start out doing really simple projects and feel like involved in it? Because like I touched on it before and it was very but I thought I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. So just for, if, and not everybody heard that, the question was like, if like WebGL and shaders are involved in some of these projects, and because that's a comparably complicated technique in tech stack, how I first got into it. So yeah, the answer was yes. It was, for example, the brute case is able to push, I think, 500,000 particles in real time in 2017. So nowadays it's probably, I don't know, a million or whatever. So for those of you not aware, that's actually 3D on the web, and there's specific ways on how you directly program the graphics card. So that's what shaders really are. So I got into it indeed just by doing these like daily practices, right? So I mean, it's something where really starting slow, setting goals. I don't know if all of you were there, but I was mentioning this idea of, we call it the magic triangle, right? Where basically we have like 3 parameters, something like music, black and white, and I don't know, interaction or something, right? And I always set myself these spaces that I could explore, right? Where I would also stick to them for a while, because basically there's infinite potential of what you can do, and that's also a problem, because then you always like jump to the next thing, and you never like follow through when it becomes hard to do it. So I always forced myself to, in the beginning I was doing like weekly sprints, being the nerd I am, but later on what I did was at least 3 iterations of it, right? And that has helped me, because the cool thing about coding is, while there are a lot of challenges, once you've solved it forever, right? You can just come back, and there's a lot of stuff where I say, how did I do that kind of physics thing again? And I have a good archive, I have a good system, I can find it all again. And that's really important. I started just naming them, and then always taking little screenshots, because I'm a visual guy. And then I can just copy and paste that, because I know how it works, I understand it. That's also really important. I mean, I know a lot of people are now just basically asking ChatGPT to solve certain problems, but I think it's really important that if you get into the actual practical side of things, that you understand what you're doing, because only then can you push it forward, and only then can you connect it and understand how these things come together. So there's a beautiful book by, they call him the Bob Ross of coding, Daniel Schiffman, and he wrote a book on the nature of code. And it was a huge inspiration for me, because I always hated using randomness and just chance. Not hating on anybody who does that, but for me it was like, it felt so arbitrary, right? And I was always looking for reasons why things look the way they do. And he's tapping into natural processes, physics, I don't know, flocking behaviors of birds, etc. So that's really cool, and all of these are just tiny, tiny experiments. And as you grow and as you work with that, you always find a moment where you are rewarded by something cool, right? So I mean, I think that's really key, just making it fun. Because programming can be super frustrating or super awesome fun. And it's like if you make it like really, really tiny steps, and really just find something that intrigues you. That has worked for me at least. But everything I was showing today, you could argue that you don't need to know how to code. It is very beneficial, and it definitely helps you shape your own like aesthetic more. But everything I was showing about systematic and programmatic and generative, as long as you can describe it in words, you can always find someone who could build it for you or with you, right? In the end, programming is just the same thing. It's also just expressing to a computer what you want to do. So in the end, if you learn that specific language, it is very helpful, but it's not required. So again, this is something that I believe is accessible to everybody and should be accessible to everybody.
I really loved your definition of generative. I think it's very interesting to not just define it as like just creating mass, but like to combine those 2 ideas together. I just wanted to know what you meant by like input from the artificial intelligence going into kind of your design? Like, I understand that it creates a sense of like randomness that is not fully, like you said, static. But I want to know what exactly that looks like. Like, is that what you're feeding into data, or how is that created?
So like machine learning, basically for me, as I was mentioning, right, it has two key advantages in this kind of field. Like the first one is what I mentioned about actually making qualitative data available, right? Something, for example, I created a case, I'm going to show that on Wednesday, where there was like a conference, international conference on like how to empower women in politics. And it was like in Reykjavik in Iceland, and like all the leading politicians came, and we were tasked with creating a key visual. But we thought like, okay, usually what happens there is that people get to an isolated space, really isolated in Iceland, and they don't really see that this is something that will impact the world, real people. So what we did is we kind of tapped into Twitter and like made conversations about certain topics, women, power women, and I forget, like we had 6 key topics, and we listened to them and like turned them into a tangible, visible design system that was changing on the spot. And for example, in this case, long answer to a short question was, for example, one of the key things we needed to be able to do is like, is a tweet positive or negative, right? Because that was something where we really wanted to show that certain topics are really in flux, but that they are usually also very different from what you would expect them to be, right? And also bring those conversations really to the center stage and make people realize that they're not in this isolated room, but that they're impacting the lives of many people. So in that case, for example, basically what the algorithm does, I trained it on 1.4 million classified tweets, and it takes a tweet and it outputs a number between 0 and 1, negative and positive, 0.5 being, I have no idea. But it was a good system. So in that case, like I take that 0 and 1, right, and I turn that into a design. Or like as I was showing with the Surface project, there's an analysis of a face where I say yes or no, I can use it. Or I'm currently working on a project where we're kind of trying to break down the barrier between like musicians and the actual audience, where there's a combination of basically responses from people in the audience, and that creates certain visuals. But because the problem, and that's getting into the second point of generative design, usually is that we generate it, and thus meaning we create usually abstract forms and shapes. You can only use certain core fundamental elements, right? Square, circle, and triangle basically being the ones you have access to. So machine learning, what it enables in this case and in many others, is actually to tap into aesthetics that weren't available before, right? So in that case, for example, it's generating certain smoke-like structures, but I'm feeding those back into like a stable diffusion variant, which is kind of like hallucinating on that, basically generating forms coming in and out of space based on the music, based on the emotions of the people, kind of leading you to a next step, right? And those are things where it's not the only thing, it's part of this process, right? Those rules from those systems and taking them and using them, and there's layers upon layers of actual execution of that. And sometimes it can be simple, sometimes it can be really complicated, as with this project. Sometimes you can use it to cluster data into certain topics or have access to things which would otherwise be manual. But again, for me it's really interesting because except for this moment of where you use music for generative design, where you see something and you hear it and you make an instant connection in your head, there's no need for explanation when your data source is music. But I personally have not found any other data source that doesn't need words or very clear images to convey the message, right? Otherwise it's just a shape. If you saw Brute without the story I told you, it would just be shapes, right? It wouldn't mean anything. So that's really something where machine learning can absolutely help with generative image synthesis, because you can tap into things which already have a certain meaning or an emotional attachment to people. And playing with that in the context of co-creation, right? What happens if I bring those things together? I think that's where new stuff happens and where it really becomes exciting. And again, it's not really difficult, it's just a new perspective on it. It's really not subscribing to the idea of engineers that you can automate our worlds, because I do not subscribe to that idea, because in the end there's always a spark of something that is intriguing and new that comes from everything you do, and it's not really something that just comes from a large data set.
Patrik,
we have to
we have to give up the room, and plus we're going to have you for the workshop on Wednesday, which is so generous of you. So maybe one more question. Have time for one more question? Anybody?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, go.
Wait, I really loved the whole concept of data and brand and how people can like see themselves in their brand from this approach. And I know you touched on this about how it's going from input to output, where the output is leaning in a more tangible direction of getting people to move around. And with the Philharmony example, you said like they could use the data for like to create their own assets, and I wonder like what's the future of the tangible part of brand? Do you see it as like physical things people can hold, or do you think it's like will move beyond the screen, and how do you see the future of your work going?
That's a really great question, as all of them. I was just very briefly scrolling through this like input-output map, right? And that is something I had actually in my office when I got started very early on. And for me, that was incredibly exciting because this method and this kind of mindset means that you can turn anything into anything. There's nothing stopping you from turning the words of a book into music, or from turning the stock price into a sculpture, right? So I think it's completely open to you where you want to take this. I'm a communications designer, so usually what I do takes certain visual forms, but there's nothing stopping you from taking it anywhere else. I think one very exciting development, which isn't probably too far out, is more accessible augmented reality interfaces, just because overlaying the real world with some of these possibilities is definitely going to open up a lot of potential. But I feel also like in a world where everything becomes faster and where you just on Instagram scroll and scroll and there's no context to things anymore, anything where you actually are able to get something physical to people will actually kind of just connect them differently, right? So I think it's definitely going into a direction where it's going to be multi-sensory and happening on different levels. The cool thing about the web really is that it transcends all borders. You can push it anywhere. It can be in your pocket, it can be on your laptop, it can be on screens, but it can also drive a 3D printer. So a lot of my systems output different end results, from 3D assets to SVG to graphics and videos, but it could also be a light installation, sound, or whatever. So again, long answer to, there's really no limit. It's up to you. And why I'm standing here and why I'm advocating it for it so much is that I believe the more people think this way and work this way, the more interesting projects you're going to see, the more inspiration you have, and the more people will actually then be inspired by that again, right? So I mean, I just hope to get the ball rolling somehow. Yes.
Thank you very much.